Initiation by Robert Hugh Benson. Section 10. Subsection 3. There's no more to be said, Aunt Anna, observed Neville a half-hour later, as their pastor went down the garden towards the church. He's impossible. Haven't I always said so? Jim, too, was gone, and minds could be spoken. Poor Father Richardson had made matters even worse, if that's conceivable. If he had simply said goodbye when the entrance of Jim and the collies gave him an opening, at any rate that would have shown some faint sense that a breach had opened. Or if, even then, he had said he was sorry for having spoken as he had, and that his last remark, above all others, was quite indefensible, as in his heart he knew it to be. Even then, the decencies would have been observed. But he stayed on to tea. He talked, as he thought, intelligently and easily. He allowed Neville, who had war in his heart, to hand him the buttered tea cake, and he had helped himself to a piece of cake. And he had done all this believing that somehow it mended matters, and thinking that if Sir Neville could talk smoothly about Rome and the weather, he himself could not do better than follow his example. He went away at last then, certainly perturbed by the memory of the previous scene, and quite aware that he had been exceedingly indiscreet, and yet, on the whole, reassured by the naturalness of the other two, and especially glad that he had not been obliged to apologize. It would all blow over, he told himself. Besides, he was a priest, and his rights could not possibly be encroached upon. It might have lowered his dignity to have apologized. He was tolerably content then, as he went back to his house and began to get his sermon ready for the evening. Anna made no answer to her nephew's remark. Indeed, there was not much answer to make. "You see," Cousin Neville continued, "it's no kind of good being decent to a man like that. As it is, I shouldn't be in the least surprised if he denounced me from the altar, or preached against insolence and discourtesy to God's priests." "Neville! Of course he won't. I'm certain that he's perfectly miserable." "Not in the very least," said Neville. "He is congratulating himself, on the contrary, on having been brave enough to beard people of an exalted position." "Exalted position? Ha! Don't, my dear." Neville was silent a moment. "And to think that that man will be chaplain here when Enid comes? It's unthinkable." "I'll write to the bishop," said Anna. "That's no good. He hasn't done anything to disgrace himself technically. At least he thinks he hasn't. When he first came, the bishop wrote to tell me I was very lucky to get such a man. Aunt Anna!" She lifted her pensive eyes from the floor. She was just about as unhappy as she could be. "Yes, my dear?" "Do you see now why I'm not exactly, keen on religion? He told us we were liars. Liars, Aunt Anna! Do you realize that?" "My dear boy, please don't." "Well, you see now, don't you? I don't want to rub it in, but it's hardly likely that I should be very keen with a chap like that. Of course, I go to Mass and all that. Oh, I forgot. I don't even do that. I shame illness, don't I? And then I lie about it." "Neville, please!" "All right. Well, you see now, anyhow." "I don't know what to say," said Anna. "And of course I shall go on sending him game and fruit and paying him every quarter and settling the candle and oil bill. That's the privilege of us of the Catholic laity, you know. He told us so from the pulpit once, you remember, and he'll wolf it all down and— Neville, I can't bear it!" "Oh, good Lord!" burst out the young man, banging the tassel on the window ledge. "And that's supposed to be religion? Why, there's more religion in a daisy growing at Frascati, or a cock that pecks his hens when you crow at him. I haven't told you about the cock, Aunt." "No, you haven't," said Anna mechanically. "Well, he pecked his hens when I crowed at him, that's all, at Frascati. That was when I had my first long talk with Enid. My word, that was a day. What did you do? Oh, we went out to Frascati, and Enid and I went up into the woods, and we jawed. Heavens, how we jawed! And there was a Pietà there. Yes, said Anna, looking up. Oh, it was there. That was all, and we saw we didn't like it, and we didn't. It was just a blot on the landscape, like that little man who just gone away. I don't understand. Oh, yes, you do, Aunt. You know perfectly well what I think about that kind of thing. It's quite hateful. Why can't they keep those locked up in churches with the priests? That little man who's just gone away would think it's beautiful. Lord, fancy a Pietà on the lawn. He looked out through the still open door beyond the tea things. The evening sunlight was golden here. Out of the shadow of the house and in the shadow of light was growing faintly blue. Through it towered the tall, stately east front, with its solemn windows and its carved balustraded terrace, and its great stone vases dripping with greenery. As he looked, the dignified figure of Masterson came out at the hall and began to descend the steps. He was coming to clear away the tea things. Certainly a Pietà would be singularly inharmonious upon this stage of smooth and wealthy peace. Neville watched Masterson's approach in silence. The old butler's arms swung stiffly from the shoulders, and he moved with that peculiar air of dignity of which such personages alone have the secret. As he came up the steps, Neville had a surge of anger again and the memory of the priest, and he took swift decision. Masterson! Yes, Sir Neville. If Father Richardson should call again at any future time, please don't show him straight into either of us. Tell him to wait, and then come and ask if we're at home or not, just as you would with anyone else. Yes, Sir Neville, said Masterson with an immovable countenance, standing like a decrepit statue. Neville saw Aunt Anna's agonized countenance, but he was determined to have his way. Tell the other servants the same, won't you? And if Father Richardson should want to come and see for himself, if we're in the garden, for instance, just tell him what your orders are. Tell him it's the same for everybody who calls. Do you understand? Masterson's eyes gleamed a little. He entirely disliked the priests, and indeed all priests. He was not a Catholic. Yes, Sir Neville. Subsection 4. When the butler was halfway back across the lawn with the tea tray, Anna spoke. Neville saw that a strong protest was coming and braced himself to meet it. My dear boy, she said, do you quite realize what you've done? He'll think it fearfully rude. I can't help it. I've let him run in and out up to now, because I didn't quite know how to stop it. But if he chooses to ride the high horse and claim the privilege of being a priest, all right. Let him be a priest, and have them all, down to the last farthing, but he shan't have any more. He'll never forgive you. That's a matter for his own conscience, then. He can do as he likes about that. So long as he's priest here, he shall have his rights. But if he says a word, I shall ask him if the Council of Trent that he's always appealing to says anything about the Catholic laity, even of exalted position, letting priests run in and out of their houses just as they please. I had him nicely over that lawnmower business, didn't I? I wish you wouldn't. Then Neville blazed a little again. My dear Aunt Anna, you forget Enid. I know you'd stand anything. You're a Catholic, you see, and a saint, and a few other things. She's a saint too, but of another kind. And she certainly wouldn't stand a bounder like that. I beg his pardon. I mean a clergyman like that. Coming and going exactly as he pleases. Even if she would stand it, I won't let her. And I may as well settle it once and for all and get the row over before she comes, if there's to be one. Oh, I see, said Aunt Anna slowly. That's why, is it? That and other things, but this last business has brought it to a point. I'm rather glad it has. I dare say I'd have let things drift otherwise. But this has finished it. It's a good job. My dear boy. Well, what would you have? Cried the young man dramatically. What else can you suggest? I don't know. Can't you give him another chance? No, I can't, Aunt Anna, and I won't. There's a limit, and he's past it. He told us we were liars, and it isn't the first time. He's never called you a liar before? No, of course he hasn't, said Neville a trifle peevishly, and I'll bet he won't again. But he's done a half a dozen things nearly as bad. Don't you remember when he preached against bridge? Just after we've had the Levisons down here and played till 1 in the morning. And all the winnings went into the plate the Sunday after, too. I remember well, because I won £9 and had to fork up. Well, he knew perfectly well we'd been playing, and he knew perfectly well it wasn't a sin, or, if he didn't, he ought to go back to school again. That was number one. Then there was— "Oh, don't go on about that," protested Anna feebly. Well, you know it's all true, but this really is the limit. There's no more to be said. There was silence again. Then Neville once more broke out. And to think that religion comes down to that sort of thing. Oh, you will love Enid, Aunt Anna. She's so fresh and big and out of doors. And spiritual. She was asking me about stipends for masses one day, and upon my word, I didn't know what to say to her. Why, began Anna dutifully, you know perfectly well that you don't pay for the— Oh, I know the stock answer, of course, but stock answers won't do with Enid. She goes right down to things. She hasn't a stock answer in the world. There's only counters, you know, and she uses gold only. But my dear— Oh, don't go on about that. That's not the point. When you see Enid, you'll know what I mean. She's like a great wind, and yet she's so still, too. You— What an ass you must think of me. He was all flushed with enthusiasm, and his eyes shone. There seemed not a trace of illness about him. Anna stood up. You're a dear boy, she said softly, and I hope, Enid— She could not go on. And you're a dear aunt, said Neville. Give me a kiss. She went across and kissed him gently on the forehead, laying her hands on his temples. She kissed him very slowly. She didn't want him to see her brimming eyes. There, said Neville. And now it's Pax about Father Richardson. If he behaves himself, that is to say. And you'll let him come in and out as usual? I will not, said Neville. What I have said, I have said. I only meant that I wouldn't, after all, go and tell him precisely what I think of him. I had meant to, you know. Till when? Till you kissed me. She turned away to the steps. Where are you going? I'm going to get ready for church, she said, with her face still averted. You're going to church after all that? Of course I am. What difference does it make? Come too. By George, shall I? What a gorgeous slap in the face. Neville lowered his legs from the window seat as if in hesitation. Do, but not as a slap in the face. Neville replaced his legs. No, he said firmly. I shall not come to church. It would be extremely unchristian to slap him in the face. And, what's worse, he wouldn't feel it. He'd think he'd brought me to a better mind. No. She laughed a little, in spite of herself. A little bubble of laughter. Well, I must go. There are the bells. Pray for me, said Neville, as she went down the steps, and she turned and nodded to him slowly. Subsection 5. He sat on a few minutes, listening to the bells. There were only 3 in number, but their jangle was very pleasant and very Sunday-ish, dimmed as it was by the great bulk of the house and high-roofed tennis court that lay between the church and the pavilion. The shadow has crept across by now, and lay even on the pavilion itself, and the river, too, that chuckled so coolly beneath the open window at which he lay, was no longer shot with lines and planes of golden light. It was soft and liquid glass into which he looked, faintly tinged here with brown and there with green, so gently blended that one tint faded into another without abruptness. He could see 2 or 3 dark shadows poised at the bottom, motionless, it appeared, except for the shifting lines that swayed above them. Far out across the park as he turned to see, the sunlight still lingered both on the higher slopes and on the motionless tops of the nearer trees. He could see a couple coming down from the direction of the Dower House. That would be Mr. Morpeth, no doubt, and his daughter Ella. They were the only Catholics, so far as he knew, who lived in that direction. The village itself was completely on the other side, beyond the front lodge gates through which he had driven last night. It was an evening of great silences and spaces, wholly tranquil, and while the bells, considered in themselves, were soft and melodious, they signified something, he thought, completely out of harmony with the evening. They were, psychologically considered, a kind of interruption. He pictured the interior of the little church, the stations of the cross round the walls, the sheaves of burning candles above the gilded altar, the sparse congregation, Father Richardson's voice, his personality, his narrow views, and his lack of breeding. And yet Enid was to come down here, not only on the visit she was to pay 3 weeks hence, but as a permanent mistress of it all. How would she fit in? Well, she would fit in to perfection with the park and the spaces and the stillness and the great house, but scarcely with that for which the church bells stood. On the whole, now, he did most emphatically not think that she would be a Catholic. It was growing a little chilly, and he shivered once or twice. Then he thought that he had better go in. Certainly his headache was all right, and he could see again as well as ever. But it was best to take no risks. He would go and see where Jim was. Perhaps if he wasn't at church, he would like a lesson at billiards.